I do have a lot to say about leadership, and I have had some leadership success. But what you may not know is leadership was really, really difficult for me. I was smart, I was energetic, I was driven, and I founded my first software company in my mid-30s. But I wasn't mentally and emotionally ready for that roller coaster. And the amount of pressure that was on me, because we had success. That's a funny thing. We were actually successful. We were so successful, I was on the front page of the newspaper in California. And on the outside, everything looked great. But that's not the way it was on the inside. And the larger my company got, the more my lack of leadership became a problem. I felt like everything was out of control. My only goal every day was to get to the next day. I had this massive, massive feeling of imposter syndrome. And I'll be honest with you, my biggest fear back then, my absolute biggest fear, would be that somebody else would find out that I didn't know what I was doing, and then everybody else would find out and we'd all come crashing down. And I'm like, look, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I got to figure this thing out. So I went and got some really unique education, got some great coaches, got the support I needed, and I think I figured some stuff out because we had some success. My one company, at one time I owned three, two in California and one in Singapore, but my main company was listed on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies a few years in a row. We were voted the #1 best place to work, and I won Social Entrepreneur of the Year. So that was externally, but internally, leadership was finally fun. The story has a good ending, don't worry. The leadership was finally fun for the first time in my life. And now what I do is I teach leaders to go through the same transformation I did because I know, A, how difficult it can be to struggle as a leader, and then I can also know what great change you can bring about when you figure this leadership thing out. And especially in an organization and a division like TDI, the amazing thing has been, I've sat through some of the sessions, you're doing such important things that we need to give you everything you can to be successful for you, your team, Norway, and the world. So I'm gonna share the one key mindset shift that's gonna help you, not only in your team, but I've heard a lot about collaboration, I've heard a lot about partnerships, I've heard a lot about working around silos. So I came up with your team about one great mindset shift for everybody to make. Does that sound good? All right. If you said no, I don't know what we talk about for the next 20. So we're on the right page. But I want to tell you a little bit about my story first. Believe it or not, I'm not from Bergen. I'm not from Oslo. This is not a Norwegian accent, right? I'm a Yank. I'm an American. I married a British woman a couple years ago, so I live outside of London. And I'm from a place called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the States. Anybody ever heard of Pittsburgh? Oh, wow, I got a couple people here. That's a lot, actually. But when I'm in the UK, a lot of them haven't heard about Pittsburgh. So I say it's sort of like the Liverpool of the America. I say it rains a lot, it's blue collar, and we got a really good football team. But then I tell them it's American football, the real football. But they don't think that's as funny as I do. But anyway, yes. You guys got a good Norwegian player, I guess, over in Manchester, so I'm sure you get it. But I was a real nerd when I grew up. My dad bought me, I'm 53 now, my dad bought me an Apple II clone when I was 13 years old, and I taught myself programming in my basement from paperback books. When I got a little older, when I got 16, 17, 18 years old, what me and my friends would do, instead of going to the club or the bar, we would go get the latest video card or get more RAM for our PCs to play the latest video games. Needless to say, I wasn't having a lot of sex around those ages. But so I got a little older, and I got a really crappy IT job outside of uni, and I had a cousin in California, and he calls me up. I'm 22 years old. He goes, "Hey, Mike, how's it going?" I'm like, "Well, it's okay. I got this crappy job." He said, "Why are you going to have a crappy job in Pennsylvania? Why don't you come up to California and have a crappy job?" I'm like, "There's a lot of logic in that." So I packed up my car, and drove across the country, and went to California, land of the sun. And I got involved in ERP, so Microsoft Dynamics, SAP. Are you guys on SAP? So you know the enterprise software where I'm from. It was great because I helped the guy. That was early in my 20s, and then I helped him build it up, and then we got acquired, actually by a Danish company. So I got moved to the UK, and then to Denmark, and then I went to Singapore. So I got all this great experience from business, and I really got to know the software technology. I knew I get to learn about business pretty well. Moved back up to California. There was a gap in the marketplace, and that's where I started my first company, and that's why we had some success very, very quickly. Now, around that time, like I mentioned, we scaled quickly. I hired some of my friends from the industry because I was in the industry for a while. We had that success, but I didn't understand what leadership was. I figured, hey, I'm a programmer, you're a programmer. Let's bring a bunch of programmers here. We'll have a great technical, I know what you're going through. I'm one of you guys. So we had this team of really talented people. But obviously, the larger we got, the more I thought leadership was just getting a bunch of to-dos in, handing them out. And if they didn't get them done as fast or as well as I thought, I'd just get frustrated. And then obviously the cracks started to show. I had a buddy left and a close friend, and he said, I don't really like the culture here. And I sort of knew what a culture was, but I didn't really understand what the culture of my organization was. And I sure didn't understand how to change my culture. And then we lost a couple big clients we shouldn't have lost. And then Celia brought up this term called moments that matter. I had a moment that mattered, and I will never, ever forget. It was April 1st, 2008. Now, I had a key employee who I gave some equity to. So he's technically a business partner. He had a small amount of equity. And this is a Wednesday around the middle of the day, and we were having a bit of a disagreement about how much equity he should get. So tensions were high around the office. And he came in. I was sitting at my desk, and I remember he came in. This is Wednesday, 10 a.m. He came in and he asked me a question. And I gave it just an operational question. I gave him an answer. And he didn't like that. So we started, in a way, having a back and forth. But it was a disagreement. And the more we went back and forth, the angrier he got. Now I'm pretty laid back, so I just, I was giving my point of view, but he was getting angrier and angrier. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody get so angry they just get red and they just start shaking. That's what he was doing, and he started yelling at me. And I said, "Look, don't yell at me in our office. Go back to your office. Let's talk about this after hours because we both work late." So I thought that was it. He was in the doorway, and then he left the doorway, but then he popped back in and he said, "You know what? I'm going to wipe that smile off your face." He came in, walked around my desk. I was sitting down. He reached back and he punched me. April 1st, 2008, 10 a.m., Wednesday, I got assaulted by my own business partner. I saw it coming. I did that. We just stared at each other. He turned around and he walked out, and I shut the door. I was like, and people ask me what I was going through. I think I was in shock. Have you ever seen something happen so crazy in your life? You're like, did that really happen? And not only did that really happen, if this really happened, I know what the rest of my life was going to take a fork. And I was like, can I just ignore this? I called up a guy that was sort of mentoring me. I said, hey, what's going on? What should I do? He's like, if this happened once, this is going to happen again. You got to go to the police and report this. So I went to the police. The next day he came in, I had an armed guard handing him a restraining order. You guys know what a restraining order is. Copy of the lawsuit, and I could still technically fire him. So I fired him. I'll never forget that day because we had a big stairway. As each employee came in, I had to bring him in and sit him down and say, hey, the guy that was the VP of Ops that you reported to, he's no longer here because he hit me. I had to call all our enterprise clients who had our ERP and say, hey, the guy that was your main point of contact is no longer here. It was the hardest day of my life, because I knew that my life had changed. And I'll never forget that night. I got through that day. I'm basically about to spiral into depression because I knew a lawsuit was coming. I knew all these other things was coming. And and I'll be quite honest with you. I was rolling a joint, I had the Johnny Walker pour, and I was going to do some cocaine. Because at that time in my life, that's how I dealt with problems. But I started to reflect on my life. And it's like, everybody comes up to me and they're like, Mike, you have this great life. You're partying all over the place. You have these successful businesses. And I would always think, I hate my life. I have no control. I have no fun. I have no happiness. I just have stress. And I felt so out of place, like I mentioned. And then I'm reflecting on my life. And it's like, what is going on? Maybe I should just go back to being a programmer. I was good at that. I can make some money. It's a lot easier life. I'm like, screw that. I've always wanted to own a business. And here I am, I'm owning it. I just got to figure it out. The problem is I was asking myself the wrong questions. I'm going to figure out how to become happy and how to be a great leader. That's what I'm going to do. I'm a good doer. That's what I need to work on doing. Right around then, I joined a group called EO. It's a group of entrepreneurs, so it's a group of true business owners. And I got to know two of the business owners, and they both had just a real sense of calmness and peace about them. Now, up until then in my life, I've achieved a lot of things, but calmness and peace were never two things that I've achieved. And I got to know these guys, and they became friends of mine, and they both went to this really unique program. And I found out about this program, and I realized, and I just pretty much signed up to it because I knew I needed help. And I ended up, over the next 2 years, I ended up earning a master's degree in spiritual psychology. So everybody wants to know what spiritual psychology is, and I want to give everybody here a taste of what spiritual psychology is. So for the next 25 minutes, we're going to do a lot of meditating and hugging. All right, Norwegians, relax. I did that down in Austria. All the Austrians like, 9 hugging, 9 hugging. You ever want to freak a German or Austrian out, just give them a big old hug. But anyway, no, when I say spiritual psychology, it's nothing to do with religion. It's a compassionate view of psychology. We learned 6 different psychoanalysis techniques. We learned NLP, Gestalt, psychosynthesis, et cetera. But we learn it from a place where we're all loving beings. And if we exhibit things other than love, if we exhibit jealousy or sadness, first of all, that's okay. We're human beings. That's what we do. But that means we have some psychological unresolved issues in there. We use psychology to clear that out. And we clear that out to get to be you in line with your true self or your soul if you choose to believe you have a soul. So that's how we use psychology. That's a spiritual part of it. And it changed my personal life 180 degrees, but it also transformed my leadership. Because through this program, I got to really understand and know who I was, got to know who I was. And I realized that before I was so insecure that I was spending so much energy trying to be the person. I was so desperate to be accepted and be respected and to be liked. So I was spending all this energy trying to be the person that I thought you would like and that you would respect. But obviously that's not authentic, and that's draining as well. So through this program, I really got to know who I was, and I brought that out. I brought that out in my leadership, and I was like, look, these are my values, this is who I am, this is my purpose, and everybody responded to that. And I was really connected. I got really connected to my employees. We were giving great service to our clients. And we started giving back to the community, which I think we all want to do. We just don't always know how to do that. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I scaled the companies. And then in California, a couple business owners saw the changes in me and changes in the organization and my company. And they asked me to come help them. And I guess I was coaching before I knew what coaching was. And I was like, hey, I sort of enjoy this. And I was thinking, I just spent 25 years in accounting software. Maybe it's time for a change. And I know what you're thinking. There's nothing more sexy than when you mix accounting and software. Like, I know I was a bit of a VIP in the accounting software world, but I love my time there. But I was like, it's time for a change. And now what I do is I teach. I've divested. I sold all 3 software companies, and I go around the world helping leaders work on their leadership mindset. And what I mean is, I don't teach management. I teach how do you show up powerfully? How do you get the most out of your people? How do you earn respect from people? How do you overcome that imposter syndrome? Because I'll tell you what, you know who gets imposter syndrome the most? Is high achievers that push themselves. You know who doesn't get imposter syndrome? Is a dude on the couch not doing anything. So imposter syndrome is actually more common in people that push themselves. But we never talk about that because we push ourselves in these positions. We're like, oh crap, I made it here. What do I do now, right? And the reason there that we have a lot of issues in leadership is because what I call the leadership incompetence trap. Everybody here has anybody here ever heard of the Peter Principle? Yep. Yes. Can you say what the Peter Principle is real quick?
Peter Cherry, you get promoted until you are not successful anymore.
Exactly. You keep getting promoted to, he says, level of incompetence until you're not successful anymore. There's truth to that. You keep getting promoted until you don't do a good job. But I don't believe it's your level of incompetence. I believe it's because we don't give leaders the support they need in their role. I was doing a presentation to Sanofi, one of their divisions, and there was a lady. She was she ran a division of the division, and she was a physician. And I jokingly asked her, I'm like, okay, so how long does it take you to become a physician? 2 or 3 years? If you ever want to make a physician angry, ask him if it takes only 2 or 3 years to become a physician. She's like, no, it takes 8 years of school and 2 years of internship. Okay, so 10 years. How long to become a good physician? to be good enough to be in charge of a division? She's like, well, another 10 years. Okay, so you spent 20 years getting good at being a physician. Okay. I said, well, what do you do now? She's like, well, I run a division with, I don't know, like, 1,000 people and, $100 million budget. I'm like, oh, great. Did you go to 20 years of leadership school to before you, because that's really hard. It's a joke. She's like, no, I went to a weekend seminar on leadership. Oh, really? Okay. But that's what we expect, right? Oh, you're good at this. You're good at this. We're just going to put a bunch of people, you in charge of a bunch of people. The problem is, and that's what I talk about, we get promoted because we do a good job. And I don't know about you, but I was a great programmer and a great project management because I was very analytical. I could outwork problems. I'm actually a bit introverted, so I could work within my bubble really, really well. I'm really driven. I'm really smart. But then when we talk about the skills needed to be a great leader, it is to motivate and inspire a team. It's about communication. It's about holding people accountable from an empowering place. I learned maybe 2% of that being a programmer. So we need to reskill leaders, and it's not, their skills, but their mindset shifts. Because that's why other people, if we don't make those mindset shifts, that's why we get stuck into micromanagement. That's why people feel like we're looking over their shoulder all the time. That's why we get stuck in some of these traps. So that's what I mean, the leadership and competence trap. And if you look at almost every statistic about leadership is not doing well globally. I mean, I think the Gallup did the latest poll, employee engagement's at like 16% worldwide. So we have a lot of growth to do. I want to bring up, anybody here this Google Project Aristotle? Yeah, a couple people, good. So the problem with leadership, it's hard to like study what works and doesn't work, because you can't tell your CFO to do one thing and your CMO to do another thing and compare them, because it's so hard to compare things when you do a split test, right, in leadership. But what they did, Google's large enough where I think they studied 200 teams over a 2-year period to find out what drove high performance. And it's nice when you have a lot of teams, you can look at it, and they did interviews and qualitative studies, et cetera. And they called it Project Aristotle because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, Aristotle said. Here's what didn't affect performance. All the stuff you think would affect performance didn't affect performance. Didn't matter how many high performers you had on the team, because that's the performers, that's not the team. Didn't matter whether they were remote or virtual or hybrid. Didn't matter how experienced the leader was. All the stuff that I would have probably guessed, none of that came up. None of that moved the needle on their performance. The number one thing that they found was what, and actually a lady at the end of the video shared it, what they call psychological safety. Psychological safety. Psychological safety, do your team members, do they feel safe bringing up an idea? Do they feel safe if you bring up a dumb idea to tell you that's a dumb idea? Do they feel safe to express themselves? Do they feel safe to take a risk? That's one of the biggest things, especially a lot of us are technical, right? A lot of us got into leadership after technical. When I was a technical person, my number one thing was to eliminate risk. And one of the things that leaders tell me that the hardest thing to get, especially when they get out of technical, is I got to make all these decisions without the complete information. I can't eliminate risk. Your job as a leader is not to eliminate risk, it's to manage risk. So that's where this comes from. And you want people, especially what I heard, you want your people taking risks. But you want people who are taking smart risks. But if you have people taking risks, people are going to fail. So people say in America, the startups, we celebrate failure. I don't ever celebrate failure. I'm too competitive. I love the win. But I get that failure is part of the job. But it's the resilience to say, hey, even though you failed or even though I failed, we're still on the right track to get back up there. So it's creating that psychological safety. And I'll tell you about, so we're going to talk about one part of psychological safety, and we're going to talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability. And we're going to say there's healthy vulnerability and there's unhealthy vulnerability. Everybody's heard about vulnerability in leadership, right? There's unhealthy vulnerability. For example, if you're on a plane and you're flying in this plane, and the pilot comes out, opens the door, and he's like, oh my God, the plane's broken. I don't know how to fix it. Was he vulnerable? Yes. Was he authentic? Yes. Was that probably a good move? I don't think so. So that's an unhealthy vulnerability. Now, when was introduced. Celia gave me a great introduction. You're probably like, oh, this guy's got some interesting backgrounds. Here, what he has to say. But maybe a tiny part of you is like, oh, is this going to be some other leadership guy telling me about how awesome he is all the time, right? Might a tiny bit of you be like, oh gosh, am I going to have to hear all this stuff? And then maybe when I shared that leadership was difficult for me, maybe you're like, huh, maybe I'm going to listen a little more. And then maybe when I told more of my story, and especially if the story related to you, what you went through, did you feel a little bit more open to what I had to say? Yeah. I do that because it's important. To me, it's important for me to share my story because if you're going through something similar, I want to let you know you're not the only one. But that's what vulnerability can do. It can create connection. Kate Middleton, it's been big news in the UK, probably over here too. She put out an inauthentic photo, right, that was doctored. Maybe not the best move in the world, but that she was not showing vulnerability. She was actually inauthentic, went against her. But then she came out and she was very vulnerable in a great heartfelt message. And then that was touching, right? That was a very touching message. So that was healthy vulnerability. This is also, you ever go into a restaurant and maybe you don't know what you want, you go to the wait staff, you're like, hey, what's good here? And they go, it's all good. Like, that's not true. You know what I mean? I've been in a lot of leadership roles, and I am constantly evaluating people. And until somebody is vulnerable, I don't trust them. Because I think, and this is the most unintuitive thing that comes to leadership, because there's part of us, I teach this stuff, and part of me only wants to show you how I'm perfect. I want to tell the stories how I've acquired companies and I've sold companies, but everybody's like, tell us how you screw up, Mike. That's what we really like to hear. I want to tell all these other stories though. But the thing is, as leaders, we often feel that we have to show up and we have to be perfect or people won't like us or respect us. But the thing is, when you do that, have you ever met somebody and they're successful, but you're like, I just don't connect with that person? That's because they're showing you what they want to show you. But when we can come and bring our humanness and bring our realness there, that's where the connection is created. And that comes through healthy vulnerability. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about fostering today, is that healthy vulnerability with you and your team, and how to do this in a healthy way that empowers your team. So I have 3 steps to healthy vulnerability. 3 steps to healthy vulnerability. First thing is, you have to own it. So this is when you're being vulnerable with your team, when you are going out there and really showing up and owning it. And I'll give you an example from my own life. I was a president. There's a thing called conscious capitalism, which is started by the CEO of Whole Foods, and it's a global movement on having businesses be a force for good. It's sort of along B Corp lines, if you know what that is. And I was president of the board of directors for one of when they started up one of the California chapters. And in the beginning, our board put on this great event to really kick it off. We had a couple hundred business owners from the local area there. It went amazing. And we want to do another event really soon, but summer was coming up. And believe it or not, Europeans, some of us in America, we go on holiday in the summer too. Whatever you heard, I know we do take some holiday. But we were like, can we squeeze an event in before summer? It's like a week or two before the kids broke up. So I'm like, this is my idea. I brought this idea. Let's do something small. Let's do like 12 business owners. Let's reach out. We need at least 6 to make it go. Let's do an experiment. Let's give it a try, and then we'll meet back next board meeting and see what happens. So we had 1 or 2 of our marketing people reach out to people, and we got 1 person signed up. And we need 6 even to run it. We wanted 12. So the board meeting comes, they report back the results, and I'm like, you know what? This was an experiment. It was my idea. It's my fault. I had this idea. I put it forward. I appreciate everybody's effort, but we're going to cut it off now because we don't want to spend more time and effort on it. My bad, totally. And then I'm like, any questions? And I just made sure nobody wanted to bring up anything, and then I moved on. So you have to own it. When it comes to being vulnerable, you have to own it. Don't half it. You have to really be there. My friend Blake was coaching this CEO, and the CEO ran a medium-sized company. And the CEO, though, was really butting heads with this sales manager. And she's been there for a while as a female sales manager. She was a really good salesperson. But over the last couple of years, they were really getting into loggerheads. And Blake's my friend. He tried to work with both of them to get them on the same page. He couldn't. And it started escalating. They started yelling at each other in the office. And finally, the CEO said to my friend Blake, he's like, I'm going to let go of her. I'm going to fire her. I'm the CEO. I own the company. I'm tired of this. And Blake did a little more research, found out she was 40% of their new product sales. And so Blake goes, I got one more shot. I got one more thing that we should try. And he said, what's that? He goes, I think you should apologize to her. What do you think he said? No way, she's an idiot, she's wrong, I'm right, da-da-da-da. And so Blake holds up the roster and he said, okay, if you get let go of 40% of your new product sales, we might as well just lay off half the people now because you're gonna have to do it in 2 or 3 months anyway. And we all hate to that's the worst thing in the world, laying off people. So the CEO is like, okay, what do you mean apologize to her? What's this look like? So my buddy Blake worked with him, and the next day he comes in and he asks her, can you join me for lunch? Of course, what does she think? She's getting fired, right? When the boss comes in and asks you that, she's like, all right. So they drove the lunch, really uncomfortable. They order, really uncomfortable, and then they're just looking at each other, and the CEO reported back. He's like, oh God, I don't want to do this. But he takes a deep breath, and he told her, he said, you know what? You've actually been selling. It's my job to support you. I've been failing you, and I apologize. And I just want to own that. And then he said, she just looked at him for like 10 seconds. He's like, well, what is she going to do? And then she starts crying. It's like, thank you. I just wanted to be acknowledged. And then she said, and you know what? I apologize too. I'm sorry. I've been acting like a child as well. And then they got on the same page. Next thing you know, they had an amazing conversation. And now, fast forward a couple of years, she's VP of sales, and they're in a whole nother realm revenue-wise because they did it. Now look at what this CEO could have done. The CEO could have fired her. Nobody would have blinked an eye. But that's not what you do as a leader. You have the responsibility to take your ego, put it in your pocket like he did, and to own it. And was he 100% responsible? No. But he's 100% responsible as a leader. And that's what the cool thing is. When you take responsibility for things like this and own it, often other people own their stuff too. But being vulnerable is also a risk. I'm not going to lie to you, because he could have done that and she could have been like, you're an idiot, and quit. He didn't know how she was going to respond. That was up to her. All he can do is really show up to be the best he could. But often, my experience is often when you truly own it and you're truly authentic about it, great things happen. So own it. When you're vulnerable, own it. Don't halfway do it. I sort of did this, own it. Second thing is what I'm going to call authentic confidence. Now, I tell, in a way, all I do is help leaders get more confidence and self-esteem. Then what I get is leaders like, oh my God, I don't want to be arrogant. Hold on a second. We don't understand this. Because over here, if you look at it, over here, if we have shyness, and then over here we have arrogance. Both of these are born out of insecurity. Shyness is people hiding because they don't want to put themselves out there, right? And arrogance is people going on the offense because they don't want people to truly see them. That's what arrogance is. But in the middle is this beautiful place called confidence. And confidence is usually not about being loud or even talking. It's about the presence, the energy that you hold, or saying that one thing in a meeting that totally changes the whole complexion of the meeting, but having enough courage to say it. That's what confidence is. Because think of a leader you look up to. Think of a leader you look up to in business, in sports, and politics. They have a confidence about them. There's never ever been an insecure leader that people are like, I want to follow that person. People, you need to have a confidence about you. And that's really what people follow. So when you are, so I come up with a matrix. Us that have worked in strategy, we love matrices. So, but if you have confidence on the vertical and vulnerability on the horizontal, it's important that you bring both to the table. Because if you are not vulnerable and not confident, you don't have credibility. That's an easy one. If you are vulnerable but you don't have confidence, people lose faith in you. People ride on your faith as a leader, ride on your confidence as a leader. When you have confidence and no vulnerability, people don't trust you. They're like, oh, I hear what they're saying, but there's that lack of trust. So to earn the respect of your company and for them to believe in you and to believe in the team, you need the vulnerability and the confidence. You need the vulnerability and the confidence. I have a couple quick stories about me and confidence. So, see, everybody wants to know about my stories where stuff goes bad for me, but I'll tell you a couple more of them. So, I was at a networking event. I mean, we've all been to networking events, right? This is a pure network. I used to get a lot of referrals. So I park my car, I walk in, and there's 3 people in like a semicircle, and I could tell by their body language they didn't really know each other. So I'm about to go introduce myself to them and start networking, which is why I'm there. Out of the corner of my eye, I spot the bar, and for some reason I pivot and I go get a drink. 2 minutes later, I'm sitting at the bar holding my drink. I'm like, I'm the biggest loser in the world. I came to network, and now I'm sitting here holding the wall up, all alone. I had a fear there. What was my fear? Why did I pivot instead of talking to those people and go get a beer? I had a fear of rejection, which is really weird because how many times have you been at a networking meeting and you're like, hi, how you doing? They're like, hi, I don't like you. Does it happen often? Not really often, right? Not really often. But I had this irrational fear, and it changed what I did. I met this guy, and he travels all the time for work. And what he said, and I think a lot of us travel, when you're alone in a hotel, normally you're eating alone, right? He's like, I hate to eat alone. I'm like, well, what do you do? He's like, well, I go find people in the hotel restaurant to eat with. I'm like, you do what? It's a little weird, dude. He's like, yeah, that's what I do. I hate to eat alone. So I go. And I'm like, well, so you just go up and introduce yourself to people? He's like, yeah, that's what I do. I'm like, well, what's your percentage rate? Like 90, 95%? He's like, no, 30, 35. I'm like, no, yes? He's like, yeah, no, yes. I'm like, actually, you're my hero. I mean, that's amazing. For him to be so secure in himself that it's not about the rejection. Because that's what we fear, is we fear that rejection. We fear that rejection when we're vulnerable. That's why we don't be vulnerable, because we fear that people reject us. But there's so much courage. The funny thing is, when we're vulnerable in front of our team, then they're like, that is a courageous leader. That is a leader I want to follow. That is a leader I trust. But that's not what our inner voice says. The last thing I want to share is you always need to have a way forward. You always need to show your team that there's a way forward. Now, I did a lot of coaching when the pandemic happened. I know a lot of business owners. I had a lot of calls with business. I just gave them away. I'm like, call me if you're having problems. I got there was these people that have been in I just had to fire 80% of my staff. I spent 20 years building this, and I'm probably going to be out of business. It was horrible. But after getting over that week or two of traumatic decisions people had to make, I got to coaching them. I'm like, you have to address your staff. And you have to address your staff and be honest with them and tell them what's going to happen, even if you don't know what's going to happen. And that might look like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm at least addressing you, because they need to know. But when you do that, your energy has to be that you're going to make this out of there. And if your energy is 99% confident that you're going to make it out of there, don't do that. Because people's intuition is great, and especially at a time of crisis, they will latch on to that 1% of your self-doubt. This is where it gets really hard being a leader, because you always have to have 100% faith that you're going to get the team to that next level or out of the crises or whatever it is. You don't have to know how. You don't have to know how. You can be like, I don't know how we're yet, but we're going to make it. That's all they need to hear sometimes. But you always have to have that inner hope and that inner faith. And when I say you always have to have it when you're in front of them, because the more pressure you take on, the more downs you're going to have. But it's just, you have to be able to understand yourself and make sure you're up for it when you're in front of your team. And it's okay to have those down times. I still have those wobbles, but then you need a support staff that's not your team to get you out of those wobbles. So this is what I'm talking about, healthy vulnerability. You have to own it. You always have to have that confidence. It's like that, it's like a football goal. You're not going to go on a lot of sports things, but if you let in a goal, what's the worst thing a goalie can do? Just think about that goal they just let in. Who watched Ted Lasso, right? Yeah, think like a goldfish, right? Think like a goldfish. Goldfish has a 3-second memory, as it is. But that's why we always need that confidence, and the confidence we have, and this is a really important clarification. The confidence isn't that you know it all. The confidence is no matter what happens, you're going to be able to solve it. That's the confidence you need. It's not that you have all the answers. That me and my team, no matter what happens, if this happens, we got it covered. If this happens, we got it covered. That's the confidence you need. And that's the confidence you need to instill in your team. Now, we talked about these 3 types of vulnerability. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hear from a few of your leaders. And we're going to take vulnerability here to the next step. We're going to bring it into the room here because it's great hearing my stories. It's great hearing stories I talk about other people. But what we really want to do is bring it there and to really take it to the next level. So I'm going to call back up Celia and Geir. And I'll see you again in a few minutes. Thank you.
So I'll invite you back, Michael, for some engagement with the crowds. So thank you.
Well, thank you both. And that takes a lot of courage to share that. It's easy for me to share that as an outsider, but it takes a lot of courage. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that. And it's easy for us to do it, but now that we did it, we're going to get you all to do this. So you're sitting at round tables. What we're going to do is everybody has a theme. So this is, pop this back on here, the slides. We're going to give you a chance to share your moment that mattered with other people at your table. Because we're here to create connections. We're here to create trust. We're here to create relationships. So here's how this is going to work. Everybody has a round table, but there's a seam in the middle. So if you want to break it into 2, so each table will have 2. And you're all leaders, so if you have 1 on one side and 8 on the other, try to balance them out. We trust you. Don't worry, technical people. But here's how this is going to work. We're going to give you a minute at the end of this to think about what story that you potentially want to share with your teammates. And we're going to have about 20 minutes to do this. And I'd rather, if there's 4 people, I'd rather 2 people share deeply than everybody try to get theirs in. Now, what I want you to do is sort of check in right now to see your relationship with the other people in your group. And then once we go through this, check in again to see if you feel more connected, to see if there's more trust. And the funny thing is, even if you're not the one sharing, you're still going to, I bet, feel that connection. So we're going to just take turns. 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people is going to share a story about how that shaped them, a difficult time they went through, and how that works. So when you do this, you want to be specific, not, oh, I got promoted, it was tough. Talk about, walk people through the story. When you do that, share your emotions. The emotional part is the important part. It was hard. It's okay to be hard. I was sad. I was doubting myself. I was like, should I even be doing this? That's where the gold is, the emotions. And then find the lessons in the transformation. Just like they share their key point. How did that lead to who you are now? Those difficult times. Because you know what? We've all had them. You don't get character. You don't get resilience without going through the fire. And once you know people's story, you see them in a totally different light. See them because then you know now I know why they do what they do, why they're in people in development, right? So that's what you want to do. And if you're listening, if you're on the listening end, as you're in the listening, just listen with compassion. You're not there to coach them. And in fact, you're not even there to judge them, because sometimes we'll think, oh, would I have done this? Would I have done that? That's not your job. Your job is just to be present with them and to listen to what is a difficult time in their life and to really honor that. And they'll feel that. They'll feel that compassion. And so we're going to do that. So we got 20 minutes. So we're going to, any questions on this? Good. At the end, we'll do a little wrap up. We'll ask to hear from a couple people about their experience. You don't have to share your story. Nobody's going to share their story publicly, but we will do a little catch up. So go ahead, okay, so take 1 minute. We're just going to give everybody 1 minute to just think about what story do you want to share and how do you want to share that story. So just take a minute of silence. Okay, everybody, okay. All right, okay. All right. I hate stopping people in the middle of stories. I hate stopping people in the middle of stories. All right, everybody. Yeah. All right. All right, thank you, everybody. So you were able to share your stories with each other. You were able to share your stories with each other and really get to know each other. I just want to hear from 2 or 3 people. I don't want to hear about the stories. What was this experience like? Raise your hand if you would like to share with us. Again, I'm asking for courage. It takes courage to stand up in front of everybody and get a microphone. What did you learn from this experience? How did this make you feel? Did it make you feel more connected? What did you learn about sharing your story? Who's going to share with us? Come on, people are going to ask me how TDI leaders were. I'm going to be like, I don't know, man. Oh, right there. Thank you.
Hello, thanks. Nick Ashton from Oil and Gas Subsurface again. I didn't have to share anything because there was 2 people here, so I haven't shared. But what did I feel? And when I was listening, they were quite kind of moving stories. People sharing things which they thought were pretty difficult, uncomfortable, and I felt caring. I wouldn't say as far as I wanted to hug them, but tending towards that direction, experiences which I could relate to. And I was thinking, why didn't you just call me? I don't know them. Well, you should have called me and I could have helped you. So I think there's a lot of help. I think there's a lot of help in this room. And so they said, it's not something we really talk about as leaders. Well, here's 200 people you can ring.
Now we do, right, now we do. Thank you, man, thank you. All right. Somebody from over here, because you know I'm going to start picking people if you don't raise your hand. Who from over here wants to share? Yeah, please.
We actually did hug on this table. and then I think for me, what really was the reason behind it is that while they shared the story, because I also didn't share, but they shared, we sort of, that connection came. And I think we also managed to find the lessons learned in that, even though there was said at the table, I'm not sure if there's a lesson learned in this. And we discussed it a little bit, and then we said, yeah, there is actually a lesson learned. And we also tried to relate it to things we see now, here, today, around if it might be, how do you treat people? How do you see people? How do we look at work-related illness, which we see in the company, right? So I think there's sharing these stories gives you also something to take home, to take with you, and to build on further tomorrow.
Yes,
I think
thank
for
you.
me, that was what I take out of these 2 brave people. And we're only 3 at the table, right? So,
Thank you so much. And I think even though you didn't share, you still felt connected to them and you still probably felt connected to them because he was listening compassionately, right? So listening compassionately is just as active in a way as sharing a story. Thank you. You have something. Go ahead. Pass the microphone back.
Thank you. My name is Knut. I work in communication. I think Leonard Cohen has a text line that says, there's a crack in everything, and that's where lights comes in, or something like that. And I think that's what this maybe shows us, that when we are able to be human, show that we have cracks, at least in my eyes, that builds trust. So for the 2 stories I had on my table, don't know any of them very much until today, but I have more kind of trust in them than I had just a few minutes ago. So I think that's what it shows.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, you're off the hook, middle people, because we did 2 over there, but that's good. Thank you everybody for sharing. I'm just going to turn it over. And the only other thing I said is, you want to talk about breaking down silos. You want to talk about strategic partnerships. When you're there, when you're chatting with these people, have the deep conversation. That's where the relationship is going to be made. Don't do the surface level thing. Have the courage to ask the deep questions and share, and that's where relationships are going to be made. Now, I'm going to probably join you for drinks. I love talking about this stuff. So if you ever want to chat with me over the next hour or two, please do come up. And I really love the meeting leaders. And it was a pleasure to meet all of you and to be in front of you. I consider it a real honor. I'm going to take it back to care. Thank you so much.